Aloha, I'm Lyla Berg. Mahalo for tuning in to Island Focus. We're here at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific, more commonly known as Punchbowl, to learn about the organizations who are providing assistance to veterans in Hawaii. Thank you for joining us on Island Focus. So this is a familiar statue to many of us here.
Absolutely, Lyla. This is the Lady Columbia statue. Lady Columbia represents all the mothers around the world that have lost sons or daughters during battle. And if you look at the inscription on it, the solemn pride that must be yours to have laid so costly a sacrifice upon the altar of freedom, that was written by Abraham Lincoln. And it was pinned in a letter that he wrote to a Mrs. Bixby. Mrs. Bixby lost 5 sons during the Civil War. So Lady Columbia, she represents all the mothers around the world that have lost sons or daughters during battle.
You know, it's very touching, having grown up in Hawaii, you know, to be here and to realize that this recognizes not just our sons and children, but generations. Mahalo for being with us, Jim, today in your busy schedule. You have a lot of responsibilities as the director of Punchbowl.
We do. Most of them are focused or centered on the interments that we do every day, Monday through Friday, typically 6 to 8 every day, of our local veterans and their spouses. But we also have another 2 or 3 other faces that we see with the public, which is typically have the tour companies putting together tours that go from the Arizona up to Punchbowl. The unusual part here is that we don't allow them to offload in the cemetery because the cemetery operations take priority over everything. So it doesn't matter who's visiting. For instance, this morning we had the Indian Minister of Defense along with the Indo-PACOM commander here for a short ceremony. But that is a secondary priority for us. Our first priority is always to take care of those families and their veterans. And then the third piece of that is, again, not only the tourists, but the dignitaries. We had a congressional delegation through Monday morning of about 25 people. And those are important for us because so few members of Congress are members or were members of the military. Mm-hmm. Anytime we have an opportunity to do that educational piece, we do. Our public affairs specialist, Jean Maestas, and I developed a program about 6 years ago where with the local schools and with the local military veterans education programs, we bring them out to give them an opportunity to volunteer to maybe help clean up or improve the cemetery. But as part of that, we also educate them about the history of the crater, the history of the cemetery, and then talk to them all about their benefits as a military member, because many just don't understand that. So it's a very fluid environment that we work in here, and we're very proud of it, and we're very happy, and we're very special from the standpoint all of our employees are veterans with the exception of one. We just recently hired a non-veteran. He's fitting in very, very well. He understands the program. But it's easier to do all the many things that we do when you understand the people that you're taking care of.
Yes, absolutely. And this is a very living place. My Rotary Club comes and puts leis on the graves.
Yes.
What would you say to the public who might not be aware that Punchbowl is a living place?
Don't be part of that minority or part of that population of our state who have never been here. It surprises me all the time that the only reason that some people ever come here as lifelong residents of Hawaii is because somebody visits from out of state and they take the time to come visit with them. And they are amazed, and they should be, not only at the beauty of the very unique setting of being in the crater, but also just from the breath that it takes away as you look upon that 110 acres of sacrifice, not only those military members, but their spouses and their children. They're all part of the ohana at the cemetery. It is a family commitment. And so for us, we try to continue that with a lot of the programs that we have up here. We work with all of the veterans organizations, whether it's the Oʻahu Veterans Council or the individuals like the Military Order of Purple Hearts or VFW, and they will sponsor ceremonies, whether it be Memorial Day, Veterans Day, the Korean War, to honor the military members and their families for their service during those particular war periods or times.
As a veteran yourself, it must be very reassuring to know there's a place that also takes care of families once someone has passed.
The timing is impeccable that you asked that. Yesterday, I stopped to talk to a gentleman near one of our construction sites, and he was expressing to me his appreciation of exactly what you just said. This is a benefit to our veterans and their families that is of zero cost to them. It is perpetual care for their loved one, and many people don't even know about it. As you and I were speaking earlier, literally out of all the eligible veterans, 10% take advantage of this benefit. And here in our state, we're very, very fortunate. Not only do we have the Punchbowl, the national cemetery that the VA oversees, but the state also has 8 state veterans cemeteries. So there's basically a military cemetery on every island that we should take advantage of and should utilize as a benefit.
So how do you communicate this to the schools? Because we're talking also about younger generations.
It is.
Not just valuing the veterans and what we have, but also planning their future.
So part of that is to not scare them off. This isn't about talking about war. This is about making them understand how they live their lives, what has enabled them to live their lives. So that education, it's not a history lesson, but it is. It makes it more personal. To be able to walk around the cemetery and be able to point to a gravesite and explain to a class from Punahou, from Kamehameha, about this individual and be able to relate what that individual did with their life, what the difference they made in their life by serving in the military. And it doesn't need to be somebody that was killed during action. So many, I mean, it's amazing. Every time we take visitors up into the cemetery, you know, whether it's Senator Inouye, whether it's Ernie Pyle, may have been killed in battle, but others like Senator Inouye who lived full lives. And that experience in combat, that experience with their brothers and sisters in arms, set them up to be able to live a life of public service, live a life that gives back. And that's part of what Gene, my public affairs, and I have tried to impress upon people. It's not all about you. It is about something bigger than you. And that's part of why our job is easy here, but it's also why we try to get out and educate a lot of the young folks.
Well, thank you very much for your work and for your commitment and for your aloha.
Thank you. Great.
We've just spoken with Jim Horton, director of Punchbowl Cemetery.
If you look in this section right here, you're talking about the generations. Section A is the section where all those that fought in the Pacific Theater were the first ones to be interred here. Not only that, but the individual unknown that was killed during the bombing of Pearl Harbor, he was buried in Section A in gravesite 1.
I imagine when families come here, it's quite overwhelming, but at the same time, gratifying to know that their memory will always survive.
Absolutely. We have families that come from all over the world and mostly from the mainland. They come here for the first time just to touch a name of a loved one on these courts, or they'll come to visit a grave for the first time. It's very special for them.
Really appreciate you being with us today, Lynn, and sharing with us your organization, the Nisei Veterans Legacy.
I'm so glad to be here, Lyla. First of all, thank you so much for your interest in the Nisei soldier story. Happy to be here.
Well, it would seem logical to include you in the conversation here at Punchbowl, because Punchbowl is not just any cemetery.
It's a very special place. It's run by the VA, but any veteran, of course, can be buried here. My dad is in a niche here with my mom, and so I come here every week. It's a very familiar place for me.
And so help me understand, as someone we grew up not knowing war directly, but you're very familiar with what those veterans of war felt, and that's why the organization exists.
Actually, I have to admit that I'm kind of a late bloomer. And what I mean by that, Lyla, is that although, of course, I knew my father, Walter, was a member of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. He was a disabled veteran, was injured on the battlefields in Italy in World War II. He never really talked much about his experience. So consequently, I did not know much at all. And what I've come to learn is that many of these Nisei veterans really didn't talk much about what they did. What I have found is that these men and women who served were very humble. They were very humble about their service. And although with my father, although I know he was so deeply proud of his service, he was never prideful about what he did. So I did not know that much about his service personally, and I actually knew very little about the 100th, about the 442nd. I don't remember being taught much about this in schools, and I think that's something that we would like to see changed.
But something touched you in this story, because I would suspect too, as humble as your father was, and many of the veterans were, they were also deeply hurt and touched and driven by forgiveness, I would think.
Right. I'd like to share a little bit of an embarrassing story with you, if I could. As I mentioned, growing up here, although I knew my dad was in the 442nd, I didn't know much. And it was only when I went to work for the U.S. Army in Washington, and I worked at the Pentagon, and I had my father's Army jacket hanging in my office. On the shoulder of the jacket is the Gopher Broke patch. It's a very recognizable torch. And so when soldiers and officers would come into my office, they would literally make a beeline for that jacket, because they recognized that Gopher Broke torch as representing the 442nd. And it was through their being in awe of what the 442nd did, and that I happened to be a descendant, that I learned a deeper appreciation for what these soldiers and some women did as well. So I decided that when I retired and returned to Hawaii, I would do everything I could to try to preserve and tell that story.
So please tell us a little bit more about the mission and the vision of the organization.
Sure, I'd be glad to do that. First of all, the word Nisei is a Japanese word, and it means the second generation Japanese to be in this country. And so the Issei were the first generation. They gave birth to the Nisei generation. So typically the soldiers who fought during World War II were Nisei soldiers. So the NVL was founded in 2012. We are a small nonprofit 501c3 located here on Oʻahu, and our educational mission is simply to preserve and share the story of the Nisei soldiers of World War II. And that would include those who served in the 100th Infantry Battalion, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, the Military Intelligence Service, and the 1399 Engineer Construction Battalion, not to mention the many Nisei women who served as well.
And what sort of activities there are you involved in?
We execute against our mission in a number of ways. We have any number of exhibits that we've put together. Our most recent and largest exhibit is the Hawaii Nikkei Legacy exhibit. It's a 26-panel traveling exhibit that documents the immigration of the Japanese to Hawaii through the present time. The exhibit actually toured all over Japan. We give any number of presentations, Lyla. I've given presentations to community groups. We host a number of community events. So, for example, every year we host an annual memorial service right here at Punchbowl. And it's a free service open to the public. And during that 1 hour time, we give honor to the Nisei soldiers of World War II. Sadly, as you can appreciate, each year there are fewer veterans who can attend. However, each year there are more young people who attend. And so recently we've been able to really bring in JROTC cadets, Boy Scouts, and they've really become a fixture in this memorial. So we do a lot of community events as well.
I would imagine it's not just the memory of what they lived through, but also when they came home.
Many of the other organizations here in Hawaii, and for a while ourselves as well, really focused on what I would say is the battlefield experience. What these soldiers did on the battlefields in the European theater as well as in the Pacific. And truly those were extraordinary exploits, extraordinary. But the way I like to think about it is that they actually fought 2 battles. And the second one they fought, Lyla, was when they came back to Hawaii. When many of these veterans returned to Hawaii, they said, "We're tired of working on the plantations. We don't want to be second-class citizens anymore." So many of them got an education. They went into business. They went into politics. And they, working with many others, really helped transform Hawaii into a more equitable place.
So a final message that you've learned and you'd like us to also pay attention to?
I think what's important is that I think the legacy of these Nisei soldiers will only live on if that legacy is embraced by the youth in our community. And so one of the things that the NVL is trying very hard to do is to bring the story to the youth here in Hawaii so they can take a look at the lessons of history and make them relevant for their lives today.
Well, thank you very much for that motivation, that inspiration, and for being with us today.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
We've just had the opportunity to meet Lynn Harakuji, who is the president of the Nisei Veterans Legacy. This is a very special area.
Yes, it is. So right here in Section U, there were 838 unknowns that were interred here from the Korean War. As a result of that, we've started a disinterment project with the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency. We are disinterring all of those unknowns. As you can see, the ground is uneven, and you can see where there are patches of grass that have just been placed on the gravesite.
And some of the markers are removed.
Absolutely. You can see right here that all these markers right here have been removed. So we have disinterred about 500 already and have in the order of 300 left.
And where do their remains go?
So the remains will go back to the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency laboratory for identification.
And once they're identified who the person is and where they came from, I would imagine their families would want to have their relatives near where they live.
Absolutely. So as an ancillary effect to that, once the remains have been identified and the families reinter, usually back on the mainland, for instance, this gravesite right here was utilized today for a local veteran.
And there's one very special disinterment that was made recently.
Absolutely. In 1949, there was an unknown from Korea that was disinterred. Those remains were actually taken back to Arlington, Virginia, and placed in the tomb of the unknown.
Thank you for being with us today, Donovan. You know, it means so much, especially in this location, to understand a little bit more about the AMVETS Hawaii organization. Can you enlighten us?
The AMVETS organization And it's formerly known as the American Veterans of World War II. It was founded in 1944 by World War II veterans. 1947, the president at the time, President Truman, signed public law, making it a congressionally chartered organization. It's a volunteer-led organization here in Hawaii. We're all volunteers. Some of the things we do here, besides the Arizona Memorial, we're the keepers of the wall, the Marble Shrine Wall, and we built it, and so every so often we have to refurbish the wall. Here at Punchbowl, we dedicated the Memorial Clarion in January 1986. You know, it's a living memorial to remind us of the sacrifice that was made by all our deceased veterans that are here.
The monuments symbolize
Yes.
the closing of war, the finality of war. The veterans come from all services?
Yeah, so the AMVETS organization name changed 3 times. First was American Veterans World War II, later it became American Veterans World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. And then in 1984 was the most recent time that it was changed to just American Veterans or AMVETS.
To include everybody.
To include everyone that have served in the Army Reserve, National Guard, and all the different time periods.
So veterans is anyone,
Anyone that's
male
serving.
or female.
Male or female serving. It's for active duty service members, reservists, and those who have served in the past.
So that would also imply that being an active duty, they're involved in the community.
Oh, absolutely. Community is a huge part of what we stand for. It's about building stronger and better communities. That's what we're all about at our Veterans Center in West Oʻahu. There we have different groups and organizations that comes in. They do fundraisers for worthy causes. It has 2 softball fields, tennis court, and 3 buildings. There we have the Eva Little League that plays there. We have an all-girls softball team that plays there.
So there's a lot of life going on, even
Yes.
though what we're talking about is remembering people who have left us.
Absolutely. You know, what I found out over the years, and I've been with AMVET since 2006. I was with the then Joint POW Accounting Command, and we were asked to go to their national convention in Las Vegas at the time and give an update on our recovery operations and everything. And that's when we were asked to start an AMVETS charter here. So really it's all about community service, being a part, volunteering in our community, making a difference, inspiring our young folks to aspire to do great things. And that's one of the things that we do at our Veterans Center. We have our junior ROTC that volunteers there, or 6 different scout troops.
So check out your website, right?
Oh, absolutely. Our website is amvets-hawaii.org. And, you know, we really do invite folks to join us.
Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us, especially here. I know it means a lot to you.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. It's a great honor.
You've just had the opportunity to meet Donovan Lazarus, State Commander for AMVETS Hawaii. So this map looks like it's the summary of what happened during World War II in the Pacific.
Absolutely. This map actually shows all the major conflicts that were fought in the Pacific theater during World War II. And what's notable about this is the expansiveness of the battlefield. It's huge. And the only way that the United States could be effective in this battle is because of our strong naval and marine forces.
So the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific, that we call Punchbowl, is for the Pacific region.
Absolutely. So this particular memorial, the Honolulu Memorial, was built for all those and to honor all those that have fought in the Pacific theater.
What has been your experience when you pass by, you know, and people are standing here looking at this?
Well, as a 30-year veteran, I get it. We see the angst on those people's faces when they come to visit a loved one's gravesite, and we get to take them and show them that name, sometimes for the first time, and just feel what they're feeling when they can just open up and express their gratitude. And we're just so happy that we're a small part in being able to do that for them.
Well, it must be very gratifying for you and others who work here to know that you're sharing a common experience that maybe you didn't even have.
Absolutely, absolutely. 99.9% of all of us that work here are veterans, so we get it.
Thank you for joining us today on Island Focus. I'm Lyla Berg. On behalf of the Island Focus crew and the entire staff at Ōlelo Community Media, aloha and malama pono. Let's take care of each other and see you soon.